Have you ever stopped to consider that you might be living someone else's life? Not in some mystical sense, but in the very real way that most of us drift through our days following scripts we never consciously chose. We wake up, check our phones, rush to work, count the hours until weekend, then repeat the cycle. And somewhere in that mechanical rhythm, something profound gets lost. Something that 99% of people spend their entire existence never truly grasping. What I'm about to share with you isn't just another self-help concept or philosophical idea to ponder over coffee. It's a fundamental shift in perspective that could completely transform how you experience every single moment of your life. But here's the thing, most people, when they encounter this truth, either dismiss it immediately or think they understand it without really seeing its depth. They hear the words but miss the music. You see, we've been conditioned to believe that life is a problem to be solved, a mountain to be climbed, a destination to reach. We're constantly preparing for something, working towards something, waiting for something, always becoming, never being. And in this endless pursuit of more, better, different, we overlook what's staring us right in the face. And think about it this way: when you were a child, before the weight of expectations and responsibilities settled on your shoulders, there were moments when you became completely absorbed in play. Time seemed to disappear. You weren't thinking about yesterday's mistakes or tomorrow's worries. You were simply there, fully present, alive in that instant. What happened to that capacity? Where did that natural state of being go? The answer is both simple and revolutionary. It didn't go anywhere. You just learned to look past it. Society taught you to focus on everything except what's actually here. You learned to live in your head instead of in your life. You learned to treat the present moment as a stepping stone to somewhere more important, rather than recognizing it as the only place where life actually occurs. Now, before you think this is leading towards some meditation retreat or spiritual practice, let me be clear. This isn't about adding something new to your already busy schedule. It's about recognizing what's already happening. It's about seeing what's been here all along, hiding in plain sight. Most of us go through life like actors who've forgotten we're in a play. We become so identified with our roles, our characters, our stories, that we lose sight of the one who's playing the part. We think we are the role when we're actually the awareness that makes the role possible. We think we are the thoughts when we're actually the space in which thoughts appear and disappear. This confusion creates a peculiar kind of suffering. We start believing that our worth depends on how well we perform our roles. We think our happiness depends on external circumstances aligning just right. We convince ourselves that peace is something we have to earn, that contentment is something we have to achieve, that fulfillment is something we have to work toward. But what if I told you that what you're seeking is what's doing the seeking? What if the peace you want is the peace you already are? What if the awareness you're trying to develop is the awareness you've always been? This sounds paradoxical, I know. How can you be what you're looking for? How can you already have what you feel you lack? This is where most people get stuck. They try to understand this with their thinking mind, but thinking is just another activity happening within awareness. It's like trying to see your own eyes. You can't step outside of awareness to examine it because you are it. Let me give you a different approach. Right now, as you listen to these words, notice that you're aware of them, but also notice that you're aware that you're aware. There's a knowing that knows the knowing. This isn't something mystical or complex. It's as obvious as the fact that you exist, yet most people never pause to recognize it. This awareness, this knowing presence, is what you actually are. Not the thoughts about it, not the concepts describing it, but the direct, immediate experience of being aware. And here's what's remarkable about this awareness. It's completely unaffected by whatever appears within it. When you have a painful thought, the awareness itself doesn't become painful. When you experience fear, the awareness itself doesn't become afraid. When you feel confused, the awareness itself remains clear. Think of it like the sky. Clouds pass through it, storms rage within it, but the sky itself is never damaged, never diminished, never changed by whatever weather patterns come and go. You are like that sky. All experiences, all thoughts, all emotions are like weather patterns moving through the vast space of your being. But we've been taught to identify with the weather instead of recognizing ourselves as the sky. We think we are the storm when we're actually the space in which the storm appears. We think we are the clouds when we're actually the openness that allows clouds to form and dissolve. This misidentification is at the root of most human suffering. We feel threatened by experiences that can't actually touch what we are. We feel limited by circumstances that exist only within the unlimited space of awareness. We feel broken by events that leave our essential nature completely untouched. When you begin to see this clearly, something extraordinary happens. Life doesn't necessarily become easier, but it becomes lighter. Problems don't disappear, but they stop feeling so personal. Challenges still arise, but they no longer seem to threaten your very existence. You start to realize that you've been like someone frantically searching for their glasses while wearing them. The peace you've been seeking has been the peace you are. The love you've been looking for has been the love you are. The freedom you've been working toward has been your natural state all along. This recognition doesn't require years of practice or special techniques. It's available right now in this moment. It's not something you achieve, it's something you are. It's not something you become, it's something you've never not been. But here's the challenge. Even when you glimpse this truth, the mind wants to make it into another concept, another idea to understand and possess. It wants to turn this recognition into just another experience to file away. The ego says, "Oh, I get it now. I am awareness." But the very I that thinks it gets it is just another movement within awareness. This is why 99% of people miss it completely. They either never encounter this perspective at all, or they encounter it intellectually without recognizing it as their living reality. They think it's something philosophical to contemplate rather than something intimate to be. The invitation here is not to understand this with your mind, but to recognize it as your immediate experience. Not to think about awareness, but to be the awareness you already are. Not to seek the present moment, but to notice that you've never actually left it. In the next part, we'll explore what happens when this recognition deepens, how it transforms your relationship with everything in your life, and why this shift in perspective is perhaps the most practical thing you could ever discover. So what happens when this recognition begins to settle in? When you stop trying to grasp it with your mind and allow yourself to simply rest in what you are, the first thing you might notice is a subtle but profound shift in how you relate to your daily experience. Those automatic reactions that used to hijack your entire day begin to lose their grip. You're stuck in traffic, and instead of that familiar cascade of frustration building into a full-blown internal storm, something different happens. You notice the frustration arising, but you also notice the space in which it's arising. You're no longer consumed by the emotion because you recognize you're not the emotion. You're the aware presence in which emotions come and go, like waves on an ocean. This doesn't mean you become emotionally numb or detached. If anything, you become more genuinely responsive rather than blindly reactive. When someone you love is in pain, you feel that pain deeply, but you don't add layers of your own story about what it means or how you should fix it. You simply meet the moment with clear presence. The irony is that this recognition makes you more effective in the world, not less. When you're not constantly defending an imaginary separate self, when you're not perpetually trying to control outcomes to protect your ego, you have access to a natural intelligence that knows how to respond appropriately to whatever arises. But let's be honest about something. This isn't a magic pill that makes all difficulties vanish. Life continues to present its challenges. Bodies still get sick. Relationships still have their complexities. Financial pressures still exist. The difference is in your relationship to these experiences. They no longer feel like personal attacks on your identity because you recognize that your true identity was never at stake. Think about those moments when you've been completely absorbed in something you love. Maybe it's playing music, painting, having a deep conversation with a friend, or simply watching a sunset. In those moments, where is the sense of being a separate self struggling against the world? It dissolves naturally. There's just the experience itself unfolding effortlessly. What you're discovering is that this state isn't reserved for special moments. It's your natural condition, temporarily obscured by the habit of thinking you're someone other than the awareness in which all experience appears. It's like realizing you've been wearing colored glasses your whole life and suddenly taking them off to see the world as it actually is. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Most people, when they first glimpse this truth, want to hold on to it. They want to make it permanent, to ensure they never lose this clarity. But this very desire to possess the recognition is another movement of the mind that thinks it can own what it is. It's like trying to grab hold of space itself. The beautiful paradox is that you can't lose what you are, even when it seems like you've forgotten it. Even in your most confused, anxious, or upset moments, awareness is still perfectly present and untouched. The clouds may be thick, but the sky is still there. You just temporarily lose sight of it, and this is why practices and techniques, while sometimes helpful, aren't ultimately necessary. You don't need to develop awareness because you are awareness. You don't need to find peace because you are the peace in which all disturbance appears and dissolves. You don't need to become enlightened because the light of consciousness is already shining as your very being. What you might need is simply to stop overlooking what's already here. Stop dismissing the obvious because it seems too simple. Stop looking for something extraordinary when the most extraordinary thing is hiding in the most ordinary experience of simply being aware right now. And here's something that might surprise you. This recognition doesn't make you special or different from anyone else. In fact, it reveals the opposite. It shows you that this same aware presence is what everyone actually is, regardless of whether they recognize it or not. The beggar on the street corner and the billionaire in the penthouse are both expressions of the same fundamental consciousness, just playing different roles in the cosmic theater. This understanding naturally gives rise to what we might call compassion, though it's not the kind of compassion you have to work at or cultivate. It's the spontaneous recognition that there's ultimately no other to be compassionate toward. There's just this one awareness appearing as all the different characters in the play, sometimes recognizing itself and sometimes forgetting. When you see this clearly, judgment begins to fall away, not because you decide to be less judgmental, but because the whole framework of judgment starts to seem absurd. How can you judge another expression of your own being? It would be like your left hand criticizing your right hand for not being left enough. This doesn't mean you become passive or stop discerning between helpful and harmful actions. Intelligence still operates. Common sense still functions. You still prefer kindness over cruelty, beauty over ugliness, truth over deception. But these preferences arise from wisdom rather than from the defensive strategies of a separate self trying to protect itself. The practical implications of this shift are enormous. Relationships become less about getting something from others and more about sharing what you are. Work becomes less about climbing ladders and more about expressing your natural creativity. Problems become less like personal emergencies and more like puzzles to solve with clarity and ease. You start to notice that most of what you thought were your problems were actually just thoughts about problems. Most of what you thought was lacking was actually an idea of lack appearing in the fullness of what you are. Most of what you thought needed to be fixed was already perfectly whole. This recognition doesn't make you indifferent to the world's suffering or your own challenges. If anything, it makes you more genuinely caring because your responses come from love rather than fear, from wisdom rather than reactivity, from presence rather than the scattered energy of someone trying to manage their image and protect their story. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about this shift is how ordinary it feels once it settles in. There's no dramatic fanfare, no special experiences, no supernatural abilities. There's just the quiet recognition of what has always been true, like finally noticing that you've been breathing all along without having to think about it. You begin to see that the very seeking itself was what kept you from finding what you were looking for. It's like being thirsty while standing in a river, or feeling homeless while you've never actually left home. The seeking created the sense of distance from what was never actually distant. The effort to become what you already are was the only thing standing between you and the recognition of what you are. This is perhaps the most difficult thing for the mind to accept. We're so conditioned to believe that everything worthwhile requires effort, struggle, achievement. We think enlightenment is something you earn through years of meditation. Peace is something you attain through perfect circumstances, and happiness is something you deserve after sufficient suffering. But what if the very framework of earning and deserving is what keeps you from what's freely available right now? It's not that effort is wrong or that goals don't matter. It's that when you recognize what you actually are, effort becomes play rather than struggle. Goals become expressions of joy rather than desperate attempts to fix yourself or your life. You still act, still create, still participate fully in the dance of existence, but from a completely different foundation. When you know yourself as the space in which all experience appears, you're no longer trying to manipulate experience to make yourself feel better. You're no longer at war with what's happening, constantly trying to push away the unpleasant and cling to the pleasant. You discover a natural ease with whatever is present because you realize that what you are cannot be threatened by any experience. This doesn't mean you become a doormat or stop having preferences. You might still choose chocolate over vanilla, still prefer sunny days to rainy ones, still work to create positive change in the world. But these preferences arise from a place of freedom rather than compulsion. They're expressions of your nature rather than desperate attempts to avoid discomfort. And here's something beautiful that happens. When you stop trying to control your experience, experience begins to flow more harmoniously. It's as if the universe has been waiting for you to stop fighting it so it can show you its natural intelligence. Opportunities appear that you couldn't have forced. Relationships deepen in ways you couldn't have manipulated. Solutions emerge that you couldn't have figured out with thinking alone. This isn't magic. It's simply what happens when you stop interfering with the natural flow of life with your constant mental commentary and resistance. When you're not busy defending a fictional separate self, all that energy becomes available for creative response to whatever life is presenting. But let's address something that often comes up when people encounter these ideas. You might be thinking, this sounds wonderful in theory, but what about real problems? What about injustice, suffering, death? How can awareness help with actual difficulties? This is where the rubber meets the road. When your child is sick, you don't need to pretend that sickness is an illusion. You take them to the doctor. You provide care and comfort. But you don't add layers of unnecessary suffering by telling yourself stories about what this means about you as a parent, or by projecting catastrophic futures, or by fighting the reality that children sometimes get sick. You respond with clear presence rather than reactive panic. When you lose your job, you don't need to pretend that money doesn't matter or that practical concerns are beneath your spiritual realization. You look for new work. You make necessary adjustments, but you don't spiral into existential crisis about your worth or your future. You handle the practical situation from a place of clarity rather than desperation. When someone you love dies, you don't need to suppress your grief or pretend that loss isn't real. You feel the full depth of love expressing itself as sorrow. But you don't create additional suffering by fighting the natural process of grief or by making the loss mean that life is fundamentally tragic. You allow love to move through you in all its forms. This is what it means to live from recognition of what you are. It's not about transit with the fullness of your being rather than the fragmented energy of someone trying to protect ending human experience, but about meeting an image. It's about responding to life from wholeness rather than reacting from the fear of a separate self that thinks it can be damaged. And perhaps most importantly, you begin to see that there was never actually anything wrong with you. All those years of self-improvement, all that effort to become a better person, all that spiritual seeking to find yourself was based on the mistaken belief that you were somehow incomplete or broken. But what you actually are has never been incomplete. What you actually are has never been broken. The personality might have rough edges, the body might have limitations, the mind might have conditioned patterns, but what you essentially are is untouched by any of these surface phenomena. You are the unchanging background against which all change appears. You are the permanent presence in which all temporary experiences come and go. This recognition brings with it a profound relaxation, not the relaxation of lethargy or indifference, but the relaxation of no longer having to prove your worth, no longer having to become longer, having to defend yourself against life. Know someone other than who you are, no longer having to fix what was never actually aliveness that doesn't depend on circumstances broken. From this relaxation comes a natural, a joy that doesn't, a peace that doesn't depend on the absence of conflict. These aren't require reasons. A love that doesn't need objects you are when you're not busy pretending to be something else. And the most wonderful part is that this recognition is contagious. When you stop performing the role of a separate self seeking to experiences you have, they're expressions of what you begin to relax too. When fulfillment, others around you stop needing them to be different to make you happy, they're free to be authentic. When you stop projecting your unconscious patterns onto them, they can show up as they actually are rather than as your fears or desires imagine them to be. This is how transformation happens, not through effort and struggle, but through recognition and relaxation. Not by becoming something new, but by stopping the pretense of being something you're not. Not by adding to yourself, but by subtracting the false layers that were hiding what was always already perfect. But we're still not at the deepest layer of this recognition. There's something even more fundamental than realizing you are awareness, something that reveals why this truth is so consistently overlooked and why recognizing it changes absolutely everything about how you experience being alive. What we're approaching now is the recognition that even the one who recognizes awareness is not separate from awareness itself. This sounds like philosophical wordplay, but stay with me because this is where the deepest freedom lies. Most people, when they first glimpse the truth that they are awareness rather than their thoughts, still maintain a subtle sense of someone who is aware. There's still an experiencer having the experience of being awareness. But look more closely. Can you find this experiencer? When you search for the one who is aware, what do you actually discover? You find more awareness, more knowing, but never a separate knower. It's like trying to bite your own teeth or step outside of space itself. The very looking is what you're looking for. This is why the mind gets so frustrated with these pointings. The mind wants to grasp this as a concept, to file it away as knowledge, to make it into another spiritual achievement. But what's being pointed to can't be possessed because you are it. You can't step outside of yourself to examine yourself because there's nowhere to step. And here's where it gets deliciously paradoxical. The very effort to understand this keeps you from recognizing it. The very seeking for awareness creates the illusion of being separate from awareness. It's like a fish searching for water while swimming in the ocean. The search itself assumes the absence of what was never actually absent. This is perhaps why 99% of people never recognize this fundamental truth. They're looking for something extraordinary when the most extraordinary thing is the simple fact that they exist, that they're aware, that experience is happening at all. They're waiting for a special state or a profound realization when what they're seeking is more intimate than their own breath. Consider this carefully. Right now, without doing anything, without changing anything, without improving anything, you are aware of these words. This awareness isn't something you created or developed. It's not something you earned or deserved. It's not something you can lose or damage. It simply is, and it's what you most fundamentally are. But notice something subtle. Even the sense of being someone who is aware of being aware is just another appearance in awareness. The witness of your experience is not separate from the experience itself. The knower and the known are not two different things meeting each other. They're one seamless movement of knowing itself. This recognition dissolves the last vestige of separation. There's no longer someone having an experience of oneness. There's just oneness appearing as the experience of someone recognizing oneness. There's no longer someone being aware. There's just awareness being aware of itself through the apparent form of a person. When this becomes clear, something remarkable happens. The search ends not because you found what you were looking for, but because you realize you were never actually lost. The spiritual journey completes itself not by arriving somewhere new, but by recognizing you never left home. The seeker dissolves not through death or transcendence, but through the simple recognition that what was seeking was what was being sought. So here you are at the end of this exploration, and perhaps you're wondering what you're supposed to do with all of this. The beautiful irony is that there's nothing to do and nowhere to go. You don't need to practice being what you already are. You don't need to work toward recognizing what's looking through your eyes right now. The very one who might try to apply these ideas is the illusion that these words have been gently dissolving. What remains when the seeker disappears is what you've always been, what you could never not be, what's reading these words right now without effort or achievement. This isn't the end of understanding. It's the beginning of living from the truth you've never actually been separate from.